Polar Ignite 3. There are some things I really like about this watch, and some things I don't. Well, hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave from Chase the Summit, and this is the brand new Polar Ignite 3 that came out a couple of weeks ago. I'm a little bit late to the game on this review. I've had this watch for a while, like a month and a half now. I've had a whole bunch of experience with it. However, I've just been so busy, I haven't gotten around to making this review, and that's what I'm doing today. So this video is gonna be sort of a different format. In most of my reviews, I go really deep and I go through all the menu systems and go through every little setting. I'm not gonna do that here because this watch is very similar to a lot of other Polar watches like the Polar Vantage V2, the Polar Grid X that I have here. They're all pretty similar, so I'd be wasting your time to go through all the settings and menus and things like that. In this video, instead, I'm gonna focus in on some of the things I really like about this watch, and then some of the things that could be better because there's a couple of glaring issues with this watch. Okay, first topic I wanna talk about on the Polar Ignite 3 is going to be pricing and options. This watch comes in at $329 here in the USA, and it comes in 4 different colors. You've got beige, purple, black, and brown copper. So there's a color for everybody out there. With pricing and options out of the way, I want to briefly go through what's the same on the Polar Ignite 3 as compared to the Polar Ignite 2, or even something like the Polar Vantage V2. The Polar Ignite 3 has the same user interface as all of these older Polar watches. This is something I wish they would change and revamp, but it is the same, which is a good thing if you're used to Polar watches, but it could be a bad thing if you're looking for an update or a refresh. Another detail that's the same on the Polar Ignite 3 is going to be the fact that it's got a single button on the left-hand side here. That's to dive through the menu systems and things like that. But the most of the interactions that you'll have with this watch are going to be through the touchscreen, just like on the Polar Ignite 2. Along with the user interface being the same, there's a lot of the same features on the Polar Ignite 3. Features like FuelWise for fueling while you're training or racing, FitSpark for suggested workouts, the fitness tests that come on board a lot of these watches for VO2 max estimation, and Training Load Pro that's built into the Polar Flow ecosystem. With all the similarities out of the way, let's dive into the first thing that I really like about the Polar Ignite 3, and that's going to be the size, weight, and form factor. As you can see here, the Polar Ignite 3 is a really sleek looking watch. I'm pretty sure the entire thing is made out of plastic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It still feels pretty robust in the hand. It feels durable enough to withstand everyday abuse, and I just generally like the way this thing looks. The Polar Ignite 3 comes in at a 43mm diameter, and it's about 9.5mm thick, which is extremely thin for a watch with these capabilities. And not only is this watch thin, but it's also extremely light, coming in at just 35 grams with the included band, or 21 grams without the band, which is crazy light for a GPS watch. And for a quick size comparison of the Polar Ignite 3 with some other random watches I have on the table here, all the way on the left, we do have the Polar Ignite 3 coming in at that 43mm diameter. To the right of that is the Polar Vantage V2. Then we have the Apple Watch Ultra. We've got the Garmin Fenix 7X, which is easily the biggest watch on the table here. And then we do have the Polar Grid X Pro all the way on the right here. And for reference, this is what the Polar Ignite 3 looks like on my 165mm circumference wrists. And you can see that it is extremely thin and it's low profile. It just kind of gets out of the way even on my rather small wrists. Now that we've talked form factor and size and weight, I want to talk about comfort because that kind of goes hand in hand with form factor. This watch is incredibly comfortable to wear. The watch itself is extremely light. You kind of forget it's on your wrist. It's also extremely thin, and one feature I really like about it is the optical heart rate sensor on the back of the watch is basically flush with the surface of the back of the watch, which is unlike a lot of competing brands. As you can see here, I've got a Garmin Fenix 7. This is a very expensive watch, but the heart rate sensor sticks out of the back of the watch, which can make it a little bit uncomfortable in some situations. And for some users, I've heard this complaint a lot, people getting rashes and things like that. Whereas the Polar Ignite 3 has a nice flush surface on the back of it. I found that leads to incredibly comfortable wear throughout the day, and I have no complaints wearing this for extended periods of time. I think aesthetically, this watch does look really nice. I like that it's got this curved glass on the front of it, and if I flip the watch on its side, it's also got this sort of like etching or thin lines kind of engraved into the bezel of the watch, which I do think makes it look a little bit classier. Moving right along onto the second thing I really like about this watch is going to be the display. This is a 1.28 AMOLED touch-enabled display display with 416 by 416 resolution, which is crazy high resolution. It's very bright, it's very vibrant, and it is AMOLED technology, so it looks great in just about any lighting condition. On top of the improved display of the Polar Ignite 3, another thing I really like about this watch is the improved user interface. Now, previously on Polar watches, there was not a whole lot of customization that you could do in the user interface or the watch face of the watch. Now, on the Polar Ignite 3, they've changed that, where as you can see here, my watch face has a bunch of little data fields, and all of these are fully customizable. So as you can see on the top left, I do have my battery life, then I've got the current weather forecast, I've got the time of day, the date, and how many steps I have for the day, which is pretty low because I have not been wearing this watch today. And the really cool thing about this watch face is that I can dive into any of these different widgets if I tap on them right from the watch face. So they're basically shortcuts to various areas of the watch. So if I want to see my step count in a breakdown, I can tap right on the steps and go right to my steps widget where I get even more information about my step count. And again, if I go back to the watch face and tap on something like the weather, I can go right into the weather widget where I can get a full breakdown of the current weather, the wind speed, the humidity, and an upcoming forecast for hours and days. And like I said, these are fully customizable. As you can see here in the settings, there's various watch faces from sort of an analog looking one with hands. You can scroll down and there's like one with 3 data fields, one with 4 data fields, there's one with 2 data fields and bigger numbers for the time of day. And you can go through and choose what information you want to see on each one of these little panes within your watch face. The next thing I like about the Polar Ignite 3 is going to have to be the battery life. Now, the battery life is not going to wow you. It's not super impressive, but because this is an AMOLED touch-enabled display, typically this kind of watch would only get a couple of days of battery life. Now, Polar has managed to improve battery life on the Polar Ignite 3, and it gets up to 5 days in standard use with default settings out of the box. Now keep in mind, this is with default settings out of the box, which means that always on display is turned off. If you decide that you want to see the time of day all the time and turn on the always on display, it will cripple the battery life down to around a couple of days of use. That's a sacrifice you might have to make if you like having always on display. On top of pretty decent standby battery life, you're also getting really good GPS battery life with this watch, considering the GPS chip update, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the Polar Ignite 3 will get up to around 30 hours in a GPS activity, which should be long enough for most people to run a 50-miler, up to a 100-mile ultramarathon, or just multiple times a week if you're doing a run or a ride. And of course, on top of the standard GPS on battery life, there's also power saver mode, which can get you up to about 100 hours of use in a GPS activity. That's with some sacrifices to accuracy, so I wouldn't bank on it for super accurate GPS and heart rate tracks, but it'll get you longer battery life if you really need it. The next thing I really like about the Polar Ignite 3 is heart rate accuracy and the optical heart rate sensor on this watch. As you can see here, the Polar Ignite 3 has Polar's latest Precision Prime heart rate sensor, and this is the latest and greatest from them, and in my testing so far, I'm getting pretty solid results. I've taken this watch out on a bunch of different runs over the past month or so. I actually ran an ultra marathon with it yesterday. I ran 32 miles with this watch yesterday, and in that time, I've got a whole bunch of data for the sake of comparison, while also wearing an ECG sensor on my chest for the best accuracy as a baseline of comparison. And for the most part, the Polar Ignite 3 delivers pretty solid optical heart rate accuracy from the sensor on the back of the watch. I don't really have any big issues with it. There are some minor deviations here or there, and like a lot of Polar watches, there are some random high spikes that occur occasionally, but they don't throw off all the data. It's just a random thing that will happen on some activities. And with that, I think we've reached the end of the list of my likes with the Polar Ignite 3. Those are the things that I really like about it. Now let's focus on what I don't like about it. First of all, we've talked about form factor and comfort already in my likes segment, but there's also something I really don't like about this watch, and that's going to be the band. For some reason, this band is incredibly uncomfortable. This is by far the worst band I've ever tested on this channel. For some reason, it's just really difficult to get on. I'll do it in real time here so you see me struggle in real life. So if I try to put the watch on, if I put the clasp together, now what I got to do is take the slack end of the band and fish it through this little hole, which is to stow away the slack material, which is a nice feature, so it's not in the way and it's kind of streamlined and things like that. But because of the texture on the outside of this band, you might be able to see it. It's almost like it's like grippy. It's got like a kind of an outsole of a shoe, maybe a sandpaper feeling to it. And as I put that through the little hole, it actually grips itself. It grips on the band and it grips on my skin. And when I try to pull it through, it's incredibly difficult to get the extra material through that hole. And what I end up doing is actually shoving some of the slack material to the side here so I can actually grab this little piece and kind of pull it, and then I have to tuck it back underneath there and kind of push it down flat, and now the watch is on my wrist. You might say, that didn't take that long, Dave. Maybe it's not a big deal. Let me tell you, I've had this for like a month, and I really don't like that, because every time I take it off to charge it or take it off when I get out of the shower or something like that, it's just a headache to get on and off. And honestly, even when it's already on my wrist, I don't find the material of this band to be super comfortable. The good news about this band is that it's easily replaceable. This is a quick release band. It's industry standard, so you can go on Amazon or buy different colors from Polar and get all kinds of different materials. So not a huge deal, just something worth noting. The next thing I do not like about the Polar Ignite 3 is going to be the lag. Now, I've already talked about the responsiveness of the touchscreen, which is good. However, there are certain parts of this watch that are incredibly laggy, and I don't know why. Now, Polar in their marketing materials say that they put a new computer or CPU inside of this watch, a new CPU chip that's supposed to be faster and more responsive. And in a lot of ways, it does feel that way. So if I swipe horizontally through the menu system here, you can see it's really smooth, really responsive, no complaints here. But as soon as you do something very specific, like pull up your notifications, which means swiping up from the bottom of the screen, you can see this actually froze right there. It's just not, it's not responsive. It's very laggy. And you can see the screen kind of hangs when you swipe it away. It's stuck there right now. And these little moments, it's like a second in some cases, or a half a second. Another situation where I found this annoyance to be incredibly frustrating is when you're in an activity or you're starting an activity and say you want to go back to your watch face right now. Let me click the button. 1, 2, click. 1, 2, 3, 4. Took almost 5 seconds to go from that activity page back to the watch face. Now, I don't know what the deal is here. It seems like they can fix this in a firmware update. Like, why is this so smooth and effortless when other activities just hang and bog the whole system down? I don't know. I'm not a software developer or somebody who works for Polar, but that is something that's bothered me with this watch, and I hope they can fix it in a firmware update. Moving right through my do not like list, I'm going to talk about the next topic here. Even though I do like the form factor and user interface of this watch, I wish it had more buttons. I don't know why some watch manufacturers are still making sport watches with a single button. Drives me nuts. If you have wet hands, or you're doing a swimming activity, or it's raining, or it's snowing, this watch is difficult to use because it's only got a single button and everything has to be done on the screen. And now we've reached the last topic in my do not like list, and this one's gonna be a big one, probably a confusing one: GPS accuracy. I have not been getting stellar GPS performance from the Polar Ignite 3, which has me scratching my head. Now, Polar did update the GPS chipset inside of the Polar Ignite 3. They added a multi-band GNSS chipset, which is kind of the gold standard by today's standards. That's a weird sentence. Just about every expensive watch on the market right now is doing the same thing. So like the Garmin Fenix 7X, this has a multi-band GPS chipset. The Garmin Forerunner 955 also has one. We've got the COROS Vertex 2, the COROS Apex 2. All of these watches have been updated to have a multi-band, multi-GNSS positioning system, which is great because they all get pretty good GPS accuracy, and I kind of expected the same thing from the Polar Ignite 3. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. I've taken this watch on a bunch of different runs, including running a 32-mile long ultramarathon with it yesterday, and during that ultramarathon, I was also wearing the Garmin Forerunner 955, which is a multi-band enabled watch, which also has really good accuracy. And this ultramarathon that I ran was an 8-mile loop. It was the same loop over and over again 4 times to get you to 32 miles. And so it's a good way to compare GPS tracks, because ideally you would see all these tracks right on top of each other, since the same track 4 times over. As you can see here, that's just not the case. The Garmin Forerunner 955 performed really well. The tracks are basically stacked right on top of each other, which indicates good GPS accuracy. Unfortunately, the Polar Ignite 3 looks a lot different. The tracks have drifted quite a bit, they're not right on top of each other, and in some cases, there's a pretty big distance, a pretty big discrepancy between each one of the tracks. And this is really unfortunate because the Polar Ignite 3 at $329 is actually one of the most affordable watches on the market with a multi-GNSS chipset, because the other watch that comes to mind in that price range would be something like the Garmin Forerunner 255, and that's actually more expensive than this watch. But unfortunately, even though it says multi-GNSS on the spec sheet, I'm just not getting really good results from this watch, and hopefully that can be solved in a firmware update, but right now, I'm just not getting the best performance I could imagine from a multi-GNSS chipset. So at the end of the day, who is the Polar Ignite 3 for, and is it worth getting? Well, yes and no, I think. If you're generally a fitness person, you're watching your sleep, you're looking to track your steps, your everyday calories burned, you want to have a nice looking watch on your wrist with a really nice display, you can check the weather and check your text messages and things like that, and you just want to go to the gym and have a way to track your heart rate and occasionally go for a run with your watch, the Polar Ignite 3 might be a good option for you. However, if you are more of a dedicated runner, a cyclist, a triathlete, a swimmer, somebody who's doing a lot of GPS on activity, there might be better options out there in light of that less than stellar GPS accuracy performance. And I say all this with the assumption that Polar is going to fix that lagginess behavior with a firmware update. I'm assuming they can. I hope they do. Polar, if you're listening, please address that issue, because the firmware on this does not feel rock solid with all of that lagginess and random hangups that I'm experiencing with this unit. At $329 on paper, the Polar Ignite 3 has a lot going for it. Unfortunately, that price point is very competitive, and there are a lot of options out there that could do a lot of the things the Polar Ignite 3 does a little bit better. But in some ways, the Polar Ignite 3 is unique because of that great display, the feature set, and some of the sleep tracking features. This could be an option for you. I just want you to be aware of some of the shortcomings that I've found while using this watch. Okay, I think we've reached the end of this video, and now I want to hear from you. Are you interested in the Polar Ignite 3? Are you getting one of these things? Let me know in the comments down below what features sold you on it, or if you're going for a different watch like the Polar Grid X or the Garmin Fenix 7 or any of the watches I've shown in this video. Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, if you found this video fun, entertaining, helpful, anything, please consider giving me a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button down below, because that really helps me out. And of course, if you're planning on getting the Polar Ignite 3 or any of the watches I've shown in this video, check out the links down below in the description, because they do help support this channel and they cost nothing extra to you, so you might as well use them. And with that, I gotta go because I've been talking for a while now. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye.